Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be for all of you listening out there across the world. Welcome to a brand new Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this June 8th, 2021. Tonight, the subject is Exorcism and Independent Catholicism. And we have a special guest, Father Chris Yates from Australia, who does a lot of the same work I do. And so you are going to have 2 hours of some pretty interesting conversation, maybe a few rants here and there. You never know what's going to happen, okay? But don't go away, because you're not going to want to miss what we're talking about tonight. Everyone, I hope everyone is having a wonderful evening and is ready to settle in for a 2-hour Vestiges After Dark. Who knows, we might even go over 2 hours. You never really know. But get your drinks ready, sit down, and relax, because we've got some good conversation for you tonight, and I'm very much looking forward to this. Little shift of gears, honestly, but I think that's what makes this show wonderful, is that we tackle more than just one part of the subject matter. It's not just esotericism on Vestiges After Dark. It's not just the paranormal. It's not just religion or spirituality. It's the entire gamut of all things that are meaningful to those non-corporeal or incorporeal experiences that make up the dynamic of spiritual reality. Okay? So it's a great show. And tonight is not going to be any exception. But first, I'd like to, go through what has been going on over the past week and do a few reminders. Remember, we're still doing our little 3 p.m. Eastern Time demand to the cosmos that the pandemic and all of its effects end. So make sure that you, as the audience, are continuing to participate in that. I think it's important that we do that each and every day, preferably together at the 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, so whatever Eastern Time is for you, that's when you do it. Set your cell phone alarm, okay, so you don't miss it. You only have to really kind of do it for a couple of minutes. Doesn't have to be, all hour long, the whole hour long, but it's important that we do this regularly, because that's going to help to stop it. And I want to see life return to normal. So the key word I've been using is normalcy. Okay, so you can integrate that as almost like a mantra into this exercise. I think it's been very successful so far. I'm amazed at how quickly it had an effect, and I think we can bring it home if we just keep going with it. So we're going to keep going with it, okay? So make sure that you're doing that every day, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, whatever that is for you, okay? We'll do it together. I set my clock, my cell phone, to 3 p.m. Eastern. That way I'm doing it at that time every day. I do emails and other things at the start of a show, and before we get started tonight with our guest and our subject matter, I was informed today of something that really bothered the hell out of me, and I thought I would share it with the audience. It's not really an email. It was a message that came in from one of my students on the Nicolaitan social media network. And it bothered me because in class, the student asked me what she should do to prepare herself for a paranormal investigation that she's about to go on. And I said, well, the best preparation you can, in terms of, being safe, is to not go on it, because paranormal investigation is, by virtue of what it is, not a safe thing to do, particularly not for people who are, not really trained in it. And there is a certain amount of training that's required to do it well and safely. And honestly, who's teaching that, right? I mean, where are you going to go to learn that? You just have to hope that you have a mentor who can mentor you, and that mentor actually knows what they're talking about, because there's really no formal channels in which to learn this stuff. But I basically said, in lieu of not going, what you can do is, if you're Catholic and she is Catholic, then you have the entire arsenal of the church at your disposal. So I would say, before anybody goes on any kind of paranormal investigation, the best thing you can do to protect yourself is, if you're Catholic, go to confession and receive the Eucharist. That's really the best thing you can do. So go to confession, then go to Mass right before you would be going on this thing. That's going to give you all the grace that you need to protect yourself from any kind of, situation, any typical situation that you could encounter in a paranormal environment. But at the same time, it's a little bit risky because the demonic is always ever present, and that's always a real possibility. And even if you have all of the grace of the church active, it doesn't mean that you're not at risk. So I explained that this is what she needs to do. So guess what? She went and contacted her local Catholic church and told them that she's a baptized Catholic, but would like to come for confession and to receive the Eucharist, and also get her child baptized as well, is what she's seeking. And I guess that was the clue that something was irregular, because typically, if you're already active within a church, you get your children baptized typically within a few, within a month of being born or so. And so they asked her what church she goes to, and she said the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church. So you can just imagine what probably went through this person's mind that heard this. And so she put my student on hold, and then came back and proceeded to tell her that we're not a real Catholic church, and that nuns can't be married because they have to take serious vows, and went on to basically patronize my student, but at the same time offered her no solution to getting her child baptized, getting into confession, and basically just wrote her off entirely. And it was more important to her, to this individual operating or at the office of this Roman Catholic parish, it was more important to her to chastise my student for considering the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church to be her home church. It was more important for her to chastise her and marginalize and criticize our church, attacking it for not being real, than it would be to actually provide the types of spiritual services that she was seeking. This is what the Roman Catholic Church has reduced itself to. So if I talk very harshly about the Roman Catholic Church, now you know why. Because too many of the Roman Catholic Church is made up of assholes. I know, because I was part of the Roman Catholic Church for too long, and I know what really goes on behind those closed doors. And that's even outside all of the scandals and everything else. I'm talking about ordinary life. Too many assholes. All right? Quote me on that one. I have no tolerance for this whatsoever. I cannot tell you how much this pisses me off. This is why I do what I do. Why does the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church exist? This is why. All right? This is why. And I know we have a lot of Roman Catholics who support us. And I know we have a lot of Roman Catholics in this audience right now. And I'm sure you're as appalled as I am at hearing this. But this is what goes on all the time. Not, well, let's why don't you come in, talk to the pastor. Let's get you back. No. More important to tell her that we're not a real church. We don't have real nuns. I guess I'm not a real bishop. That was more important. Reprehensible. Disgusting. But this is why the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church is so important. This is why the independent movement is so important, even though there's a lot of abuses within it. But it's very appropriate that this happened on, the week of this particular episode, because we've got a fantastic show for you tonight. But first, let's go ahead and bring Sister Mary Joan on. How are you doing, Sister?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you. Yeah, a little bit of fire in your heart right there, and I don't blame you. We run into this over and over and over, and it gets really tiring.
It does. And honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, I know that I don't meet expectations for what people think a good Catholic bishop is supposed to be like. I know I don't speak like one. I know I don't behave like one. And that is all by intelligent design. Because not only do I know who I'm speaking to, not only do I know how to reach people who have up until this point not been reachable, but I also know that pretense does no one any good in religion. And if you think that by being this holier than thou persona, putting this on and going around the world acting like you're, some kind of saint, if you think that that's, what the world needs right now, then, that's why the church is falling apart, because it is truly, that thinking is antiquated. The religion's fine.
I agree.
Yeah. And so I feel that this is how we reach people today, by being real, by being authentic, by not playing little games or trying to be something that we're not. Every single one of us is a sinner, from the highest position in the church to the lowest. It doesn't even matter. Everyone is a sinner. Everyone is equally condemned by that action. Let's stop playing games like we're saints. All right, let's stop being real. Let's talk like real people, and let's connect with the wonderful God that we have. And that's what it's all about. Mm-hmm. But the Catholic Church is too interested in theater, too interested in drama. They call us a fake church. It's like, what could be more fake and phony than that? At least we're not harboring pedophiles. I can guarantee you I've never done that. I am disgusted by the Roman Catholic Church right now. I am disgusted by it, because I'm hearing too many of these stories, far too many of these stories. It is inexcusable. But, let's go ahead and, let's talk about a little bit of this tonight, because I'm sure our guest tonight has his own insights and his own, I think you might even say, his own story for how he came to the particular brand of Catholicism that some Roman Catholics don't even seem to know exists. Let's get his insights in it. So our guest tonight to talk about independent Catholicism, particularly as it pertains to exorcism ministry, and I do promise you I'm going to get off the rant here in a minute. We will be talking about exorcisms tonight. We will be talking about the ministry. But my guest tonight is Father Chris Yates, who is a priest and exorcist of the Catholic Apostolic Church in Australia, which is the Australian province of ICAB, the Brazilian Catholic Apostolic Church. Originally from Manchester, England, Father Chris spent 10 years as a police officer in Oxford and London before being ordained in the Anglican Communion. Having been involved in parish ministry and police chaplaincy in Australia and England for 10 years, he left the Anglican Communion to become a Catholic priest with ICAB. Father Chris is currently the Vicar General, as well As a provincial exorcist in Australia and with extensive experience of dealing with demonic and other spiritual forces, a graduate of the Australian Catholic University, Father Chris is skilled in biblical studies, theology, and philosophy. Father Chris spent 2 years working for senators in the Australian Federal Parliament, including the only explicitly libertarian senator ever elected. He is an occasional contributor to The Spectator, a center-right publication on political themes that Christianity can help to illuminate. When relaxing, Father Chris likes a nice scotch, playing soccer, watching his beloved Manchester United, and reading books by Thomas Sowell. So let's welcome, with open arms, Father Chris Yates back to the show. He actually called on a little while ago, a few episodes ago, and we talked to him. He stayed through most of the episode, and Father Chris is back tonight as a guest, and he's going to be with us on future episodes. When we do open lines, he's going to be coming on as another person on the panel to take your questions and answer them. So get to know Father Chris today. This is his introduction. Father Chris, how are you tonight? Or this morning for you?
I'm very well. I was going to say good morning from Australia. Yes, it's 10:15 in the morning here, and the sun is shining. So a good morning from tomorrow. So in many ways, I like to think that I speak from the future. So,
yes.
Today
right.
I really do. But thanks for that introduction. And I mean, I'm happy to sort of talk about my journey towards independent Catholicism and. Particularly within ICAB, which has an interesting provenance, and many of the frustrations you aired earlier on were the frustrations in the mind of Bishop Carlos Duarte Costa when he broke from Rome in 1945. So I'm sure we can get into that, but certainly it's great to be with you, and I celebrate being part of the Independent Catholic Movement. Although I must add, I must say for the show that we're very fortunate here in this part of Australia. We have very good relationships with the Roman Catholic diocese here.
That's wonderful.
I know that can vary across the world. And there are reasons for that. I mean, which again we can touch on. My first response was one of the sort of issues.
You're kind of Father Chris. You're kind of breaking up a little bit. I don't know if.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if there's like if
I can move. Hang on. I will relocate.
Okay.
I'll relocate. Hang on. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, no problem. I just don't want you to say something really profound and we miss it.
Well, I'd like to think that's very likely. So 1 second. Is that any better here?
So far, so good. Yes, this sounds much better.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that crept in with Roman Catholicism was partly the conquest of to use a colonial term, the New World. Because really, what we're presented with in Roman Catholicism these days is a sense of a unitary structure, that's administered centrally, and we have this sort of ultramontanist view where everything is directed, if you like, from Rome and through the canon law and through the superstructure of the church. But actually, it's a very modern invention. Before Leo III, Pope Leo XIII, that wasn't the case. If you look at Brazil, for example, I mean, the origins of ICAB, the Brazilian Catholic Church, until the 20th century, none of the bishops in Brazil were appointed by Rome. They were appointed by the emperor, because the King of Portugal, who was the emperor of Brazil, had the right to appoint his own clergy because he'd been a loyal Catholic king. And the idea of priestly celibacy, for example, I mean, in Brazil, it was never observed from the very beginnings of the church. And so, when our founding bishop said, "This is ludicrous. All of my bishops are, a lot of my clergy are in marital relationships, but they're not recognized. I'm just going to recognize them."
Yeah.
For that was accused of inventing clergy marriage, but he wasn't. He was simply being honest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the idea that they couldn't work in secular work, when actually throughout Brazil, because it was poor, not many parishes could afford to pay the clergy. So the clergy did work, and so there was a sort of recognition that this sort of ideal that was coming from Rome was never the lived reality in Brazil, because life's messy and the church is filled with sinners, all of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent too much about Brazil, but there is this kind of myth of Rome that somehow it's always been this highly organized and controlled. Well, actually, that's just not true. I mean, we know that from the earliest movements of the church, the life of the apostles and what have you, that there was certainly no unitary imposition on the action of the church. It was far more dynamic, actually. In fact, the word dynamic is used, dynamos, in the New Testament a lot. It was uncontrolled power, which was the essence of the ministry.
Well, I mean, when you look at all of the various philosophical disciplines that made up pre-Orthodox Christianity, or you could say proto-Orthodox. Proto-Orthodox might be one deviation, or one iteration, rather, of Christianity, but you had so many different aspects: Marianites, Ebionites, and then you had all of the Gnostic influences as well. And at a certain point, that was all Christianity. Now, they didn't always agree, of course, which is why you had these different designations, but Christianity wasn't just one thing. It became one thing as it was consolidated into a political entity, essentially, which I think in a lot of ways was very contrary to what was intended, and certainly not what I think the fathers of the church ultimately envisioned for what the future of their church would be. It's just unfortunate that temporal power became part of the equation, and I think that's where so much of the church went wrong. I'm not one for schisms, but I understand 1054. I understand why the Eastern churches could no longer, well, they don't see themselves as having broken away. They see the Church of Rome as having broken away from them. Each side sees it as the other side broke off. But I understand it, because you reach a point where there's only so much corruption that you can tolerate before somebody has to stand up and preserve the integrity of what the church is supposed to be. And when the powers that be,
I think it comes.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say. I think that it is. Obviously, schism in the church is a grave sin. It's the gravest sin of the church, really, because without unity, it's hard to move forwards on. And I use the word forward very advisedly.
Yeah.
But it's hard to move together if we're not in unity. But actually, the sin of schism is connected to the original sin. I mean, the original sin or original guilt, however you want to frame it, was about grasping after equality with God. In other words, trying to having the hubris to believe that you could fully understand God. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you could fully understand God, you'd have to be God, and therefore there wouldn't be a God. So it's kind of a self-defeating argument. But actually, a lot of people get that wrong about the devil. They think the devil is the opposite of God, and he's not the opposite of God, because he's not equal to God.
No, we're not dualists.
He's a creature.
Right. This is
not. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's not. We're not
He's a creature
Zoroastrians.
like us.
Yeah. And so I think connected to that original sin is the idea that, and this comes back to the Great Schism and to the schisms that happened, post the Protestant Reformation, is the idea that there could be a centralized authority that would know the mind of God and therefore be able to arbitrate perfectly between communities and groups of Christians, and to say this is the gold standard and everyone must live up to it. I think it's actually, it's at best a folly, and at worst a grave deliberate sin. Now, I don't want to be too hyperbolic about it. I think that I want to assume good motives for the drive to say, no, we should, we're supposed to be one because Jesus commanded it. We commanded that we be one. I think where we bristle and where you end up with situations like you described at the beginning of your show is when you think that oneness has to be a sort of, administrative oneness instead of the oneness of serving Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some sort of red letter things that I would say, well, actually, if you deviate from these things, you can't call yourself Catholic. If you don't believe in the incarnation and the resurrection, if you don't believe Nicene creedal Christianity, then it's very difficult to be part of the church. So there are some things like that, but things like jurisdiction. I mean, Rome's tied itself in knots when it comes to jurisdiction because they have multiple competing jurisdictions within geographical localities. So, for example, you have the diocese, but then within the diocese you have Opus Dei that are their own prelature. You can have religious communities that have their own authority structure. The Jesuits, and so this idea that there's a unitary authority that's straightforward and that's based on geography, even the present-day Roman Catholic Church doesn't abide by. And so, it's not all we're saying as independent Catholics is you can't control the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit isn't controlled by the church. The Holy Spirit quickens the church, gives it life. And that we are caught up in that Holy Spirit, seeking to do God's work, kingdom. And I find it interesting that certainly it sounds from your experience like often dioceses would have stronger relationships with people who believe very contrary things to Catholics when it comes to the Eucharist, when it comes to ordination, when it even comes to how we view the Old Testament. They would have cordial relations with them, and yet within those that hold to everything other than the administrative authority structure, they can be very negative. But then I guess, when you fight with your relatives, it's always passionate than when you fight with a stranger.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, family fights are the worst.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, that's a good point because I actually said to my wife, I told her we talked a little bit about it, and I said, I don't think, if my student, when they asked her what church she belongs to, if she said she was Baptist, I don't think they would have given her the attitude or the response that they did. There's a hostility towards the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church by Roman Catholics in this country. I don't necessarily find it that bad outside. Internationally, it's really more of an American problem, I think. I'm not going to say it's exclusively that, but I do find it interesting that, when I'm tracking, if I go into the website and I track the IP addresses of where we get hits from around the world, we're getting hit by Vatican City on a nearly daily basis. So somebody out there is constantly watching what this church is doing. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But what it does indicate to me is that it's obviously something that they feel is important enough to watch. But what really bothers me is the blatant ignorance that people have about the Independent Sacramental Movement, and particularly the old Catholics, because I understand that there are a lot of deviations in the ISM that are you can barely call them Catholic. There are some groups that claim apostolic succession, but they are basically nothing more than theosophical New Thought type churches. They're really not. They don't. My gold standard as far as whether or not a person's a Christian is, can you recite the Nicene Creed and mean everything that's in it? If the answer to that is yes, then that is sufficient data to begin as the foundation to what a Christian is, and particularly a Catholic. Because if a Catholic can't recite the Nicene Creed, then there's something wrong. And some of these churches that do claim Catholicism in the overall umbrella of the ISM can't recite the Nicene Creed. And I'm saying, well, then how can you even call yourself Catholic? You can't even call yourself Christian at that point. So these are problems that I do see, but I think they are very American-like problems, or at the very least, very North American problems, because I do see that Canada, some of that bleeds into Canada as well. I am outside of America. I've had very good conversations with Roman Catholic clergy. Respect as well. I mean, they respect what we do. They understand the struggle of this type of ministry and what this ministry represents and what it does. And I wouldn't say we have like direct support, but there's definitely moral support there. Where it is in the United States of America, the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church is. I mean, I really think if they had the legal authority to execute us, they would. I really do.
Good luck.
I don't think you can. I don't think you can underestimate the legacy of where this comes from. Because my theory is that the Protestant Reformation. Sorry, let me start again. I think this is a problem for the English-speaking world, the Anglophone world, and it's partly a product of British colonialism. And I have a rounded view on British colonialism, good and bad. But British colonialism essentially exported the Protestant Reformation. Well, I should say the English Protestant Reformation. It was quite different from the European Reformations. Out to the world. And, for those that remained loyal to Catholicism, and they did, let's be honest about that, it was a bitter and sinful time. What was done to Catholics couldn't hold office. The Emancipation of Catholics Act didn't happen in Britain until the mid-19th century. They couldn't worship before that officially. Priests were killed. The Reformation was bloody. It was more bloody in Europe than in England, but it was still bloody in England, and the faith was suppressed. And so I think that there's a kind of, you would know as well as anybody that the imprint that negativity can leave in the world. And I think that we are recipients of that, because my experience, even when I was an Anglican, for example, was if I went to Spain or Italy or France, they were very receptive of it didn't matter to them if I came from the Church of England. Yeah, I was a priest.
Yeah.
But in the English-speaking world, I often jokingly refer to it as Irish Catholicism rather than Roman Catholicism. Yeah. And I say that as somebody from Irish background, so it's okay. I'm self-loathing, but I think in Irish Catholicism there was a real and actually understandable harshness towards those that, from a certain point of view, had not endured that suffering. Yeah. So I was part of the Anglo-Catholic revival in England, the Oxford movement and John Henry Newman and all that. And I remember, I was very young and very full of vigor for that movement and proclaiming this, that, the other. And I remember a Roman Catholic dame who I loved very much, and I won't name her on this show, but she was very important to me in my life, saying, just reminding me that there've been English Catholics all along, Chris. And it suddenly dawned on me the sort of innocent arrogance of the position I was coming from, and saying, we're going to restore Catholicism to England. And she said, it's never left, it's always been here. And so I kind of understand that. And I think that's helped to sort of frame my approach to Roman Catholics in the Irish Catholic Church, because I don't know. I think we need to, if we want to accuse them of hubris, then we must be accused of humility, if you know what I mean.
That's true.
Right. The antidote to hubris is humility, and I think partly exorcism ministry, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, but exorcism ministry in many ways makes me less defensive about, asserting who I am or thinking too much about what other groups of Catholics think about me. Because when you're involved in that ministry and it's effective, what more confirmation do you need?
Right,
You know?
exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's definitely true.
Um,
I think what bothers me and what riles me up and angers me about it is not so much the way they think about who I am or my authenticity or the validity
Sure.
of my orders or whatever it is that they've got in mind. I mean, since the inception of this church, that has been an issue. So it's not like it's a new thing, and it's not something that was really very damaging until we became a force to reckon with now, as we are now, where people all over the world know who we are and are interested in what we do and support us. We get support from all over the world now. But I think what bothers me is that I don't have the resources to be able to serve all of the people that consider themselves to be part of this community. I can't. I've got people, students that have children that need baptism, and there's nothing I can do
Yes.
to resolve that. So I
Right.
kind of have to depend on the fact that their local Roman Catholic Church can take care of that very simple thing. And I can't defer and say, well, go to your local Roman Catholic Church and there get the sacraments, because I can't be in all places at all times. This church has one specific location, and it's a private location. The only public work that it does is the teaching ministry through the channels of this show, or the classes that I offer, and then the exorcism outreach. But the fact of the matter is, we don't have a public pastoral ministry anymore because it was just too expensive to keep going, and so few utilized it that it was really a waste of money. But the exorcism ministry is what really, that's where the demand is, and so we decided to put all of the limited resources that this church has towards that. And that's what we now do. So there's no overhead of a public facility that, I'm there twiddling my thumbs to myself at the altar because there's nobody showing up. So that's what bothers me. That's where I get pissed off and enraged, is that I need the Roman Catholic Church to take care of the Catholics of the world. I can't do it all for them. And the fact is, if you don't have the magic formula to say to them, that was the response. And that's just not this student was just one story amongst so many that I've heard. Clients that Sister Mary Joan can definitely talk about, because she does most of the client assessments. And she'll tell you how many times that, we're like, well, what's your pastor say? And they have completely abandoned these individuals because they don't have any solution for them. And
They
that's
either won't entertain them.
I think. Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
No. Please finish, Sister Mary Jane.
I was just going to say, we have, I just spoke to a client a few days ago. She's a Roman Catholic, goes to a parish here in Atlanta. She sent an email to us and to her local priest about some paranormal issues she was having at her home. It's 2 weeks later. I've spoke with her probably 3 times, gave her some prayers and some instructions to do, which has helped. Through talking with her, found out that she's most likely a sensitive, and gave her some advice on that, and told her she should get her house blessed, and that her local priest should be able to do it. And they won't even return her phone calls or her emails. And I hear this over and over again. We have dozens of clients through the 4 years I've been with the ministry. Same problem. Their own the exorcism we had to do with the Venezuelan woman, Bishop. You remember, she went to a local parish and was just completely blown off, and it was a legitimate demonic possession.
Yeah, and which Roman Catholic Church was the only one that helped her other than us? It was when she went back to Venezuela. Venezuela.
Yes,
yeah.
The priest of Venezuela. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and do bear in mind that Catholic priest in Venezuela may well have been an ICAB priest.
It's possible.
Was, Father Chris.
It's possible.
Was.
Yeah, we don't know. She said Roman Catholic, but it might not have been.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, the distinction is almost impossible to distinguish in South America between ICAB and Roman Catholicism, because they're obviously of the same origin. But look, I think I mean, it sounds like I'm being the sort of apologist for the Roman Catholic Church. I mean,
No.
I am part of the Independent Catholic Movement, as you said, but I mean, I think that the problem they're suffering from is actually connected to something you said about, establishing parishes and the difficulty of that, but also, the sort of spiritual crisis that's been exploding since the Enlightenment, especially in the Western Church, because, when you said, yes, it's expensive to have a local presence and to do this, that, the other, well, the Roman Catholic Church are still doing that,
Right.
and yes, they've got resources that obviously we could only dream of, but nevertheless, I mean, their priests there's fewer of them. There's certainly fewer of them who are English speaking, shall we say. Certainly here in Australia, there's almost no vocations at all. So a lot of the parish priests near where I live are from Kerala in India, or they're from Nigeria, and their mothers and fathers are sacrificing their sons so that Australians who are wealthy and not willing to sacrifice, and I am sounding harsh, but I mean it, can have the sacraments. So, in a sense, Rome is taking on that responsibility and running schools and hospitals and what have you, and all of the busyness of that. And there's fewer and fewer priests to serve it. So even
That is very true.
positioned Roman priest would find it difficult to keep up with the people that, he's got to serve. I mean, we would argue, I'm sure he would too, that he has to serve everybody that comes to him. But, he has to triage it. And if somebody comes from outside with something more esoteric, then perhaps it goes to the bottom of the list, whereas in our estimation, it wouldn't. So I want to say that, but I think the greater problem of that, which is connected to the reduction in vocations in the West, in the English-speaking world, certainly a reduction in religiosity at all, certainly the Christian religion, is a product of this Enlightenment. Now, I'm not totally anti-Enlightenment. I quite like indoor lavatories. I quite like having hospitals and healthcare and everything the scientific method has brought to us. So I'm not wanting to proclaim the Dark Ages as something wonderful to go back to. But the turn to the subject, in other words, the move from an enchanted world where God was in control, there was a hierarchy of creation, sorts of things that actually you're proclaiming, and we are saying, well, these things are real.
Yeah.
Those were widely accepted by society and by the church. The church always reflects the society, which can be good and bad. And so, the turn to the subject that happens at the Enlightenment, the great Descartes principle, I think, therefore I am. And from this you get Immanuel Kant, with a reasonable approach, a rationalist approach to God. This rationalism has led to a sort of hyper-rationalism, where that leads you down a path of rejecting, in fact, any action of God in the world. It can do, and that's where it's led to, which is why there's been this crisis of faith, where the Roman Catholic Church simultaneously, and all of us to a certain degree, simultaneously affirms that rationalism, but also has these other things that are part of the church, like demonic battles, like the miracle of the incarnation, the miracle of the resurrection, and it's very hard for them to reconcile those two things. And so, and I'm at pains to point out to people, that find it difficult to believe in the sorts of activities that we describe, demonic forces and poltergeists and non-demonic entities that interfere with the physical world. If they see that as too much sort of hocus pocus, I do remind them, if they're Christians, that our faith is in fact a miracle-based faith. That those two principles of the incarnation and the resurrection are central to the Christian faith. They're what the creeds are all about.
Right.
And so, if you don't believe in miracles, you cannot be a Christian.
It's true. It's true.
One way to put it.
So if the hyper-rationalists want to reject miracles, they're actually rejecting the Christian faith. Yeah. And actually, that's wholesale what's gone on, even with people that go to church every week.
Yeah.
So I do have that kind of sympathy for the position of Catholic priests, and look, you know, you've been inside that system, that for the very few seminarians that raise their hands in the Western world, in America, in Britain, in Australia, for the very few that do, if there's any indication that they believe too much, they'll be weeded out. You know?
Really?
Well, I mean, I think we even see it with saints.
If they're too traditional,
I mean, we've seen that with saints over the last several hundred years. I mean, any time that a saint had a vision, I mean, we're coming up on the Sacred Heart here, and when you really read how the Sacred Heart became a solemnity, how long it took to become a solemnity, and the visions of various saints and how they were completely rejected by their contemporaries, even hundreds of years later, only being recognized in hindsight several hundred years after the fact, was it finally recognized, said, oh, well, this is a miracle that happened. But the contemporaries didn't believe it.
I think that is how Holy Tradition has to function. I mean, as much as it's a frustration in our own time, you know, there has to be the one of the tests of whether something is truly of God is the effect it has over the long term. So, you know, for example, the Fatima apparitions or Our Lady of Guadalupe. You know, you can only in hindsight say, oh, look, this has led to thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people gathering to worship Christ. Oh, it's probably of the church. You know, it's probably of God. I think that's understandable, but that does cause the frustration in our own time. And of course, if that's true of the positive things that happen in the life of the world, it's also true of the negative ones that, you know, we can end up slow to condemn them.
Well, I think though, the real challenge there, obviously, is in whether or not to make something a viable, like a miraculous event, and to label it or classify it as something that is recognized, so that the faithful can share in that experience and say that, you know, like for example, Fatima or any Marian vision. I mean, I know Medjugorje was definitely one that is still being questioned. You know, but you got the validation either through the canonization of saints or, you know, any of these other ways the church validates things, and that's understandable. And I do see where you're coming from, where the hundreds of years, if something stands the test of time, that's a good litmus test for this. But where I have the problem is how people like Teresa of Avila were literally condemned by people like their confessors for sharing these mystical experiences and told to ignore or reject it. It's one thing to say that the church is going to validate this now, we believe you, and now everyone can accept this as divine truth. That's one thing, okay? That's not what I'm suggesting. But I think it's very dangerous to tell a person that a visionary experience that they're having that might be very authentic to them is something that they need to disregard. Because I think that's why the church is so completely cut off from the Holy Spirit today. Because it wouldn't recognize the Holy Spirit if it slapped them in the face. Because they've become too rational and they've become too objective.
Yeah, well, I think that's why you know, people aren't banging on the door of our church asking to be let in on a Sunday for Mass. You know, is because I mean, you alluded to it earlier. Actually, what people think they want, or there's this myth that somehow, if all of us who are priests, bishops, or anybody that's religious, laity, if all of us were somehow perfectly imitating Christ, that, you know, under those circumstances, then these secularist rationalists will come flocking back to church because we'll have integrity. But it's a double lie, because actually, St. Thomas à Kempis, you know, who wrote The Imitation of Christ, was a sinner and knew he was. You know, and that's why he was able to write it. And so the nonsense that somehow we could all become perfectly Christ is just, we can only do that in the beatific vision. We're never going to achieve that this side of glory, but we have to keep trying. That's not a license to give up.
Right.
But
it's the paradox.
Even if we were reflecting that perfectly, yeah, exactly. But even if we
you
were
level up as
perfectly
much as you can.
Yeah, but they wouldn't come flocking back if that was the case. That's just one easy criticism, because of scandal or abuse, or I knew a priest and he was terrible, what have you. And I've been terrible. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm the greatest sinner, because that's also an exercise of pride. But I am a sinner nonetheless, and there's no shortage of people that could queue up to tell you how and why and where and when. So that's a lie, that somehow if we were all perfect, then people would come flocking back to Christ. That's not true. But it's also true that our secularized world doesn't allow for the possibility of that either. They're not. It's not a sincere inquiry, if you know what I mean.
I do.
And the church has to wrestle with that reality, which is that. And actually, I don't see it as a bad thing, but the church has lost its position as the default place to go. Now, much as that kind of saddens us because it may reduce the size of our flocks on Sundays or Holy Days obligation, actually, it also is a fillip to us, because it tells us the ones that are there are the faithful remnant.
Yeah.
And so we have, in fact, we've got a basis from which to build something. And you're right. I mean, look, none of us stand up on Sunday when we recite the creed and say, and I believe in the levitations of St. Teresa of Avila. That's never going to be a creedal statement.
No.
But and therefore there are the kind of fundamental. I use the word again advisedly, but there are the fundamentals of our faith, which are contained within the creed. But I think a kind of over-focus on, or rather a focus on that to the eradication of ordinary people's lived experience explains why they don't find necessarily connection and meaning when they go to these kinds of churches. And you see, my approach is to be very real, warts and all. I mean, we shouldn't emphasize our warts either, in the same way we shouldn't emphasize our virtues, but to be authentic and to be connected to what's going on now. Whereas I think there's been that through this hyper-rationalization, we don't talk about those things that go bump in the night, because people might think we're mad if we talk about that. They might think we're crazy and not serious people to be contended with. But of course, like I said earlier, the jarring truth that we actually believe in miracles as the fundamental basis of our faith. So,
yeah.
You've got to choose. And I think people have respected.
Well, I
choice.
think people have an easier time accepting something that happened 2,000 years ago as being easier to believe for some reason than some kind of similar profound or miraculous or fantastic event happening now. It's like somewhere along the lines they've been programmed to accept ancient miracles but not modern ones. And the same thing goes with the demonic. It's like, you'll have these very rational Catholics accepting the fact that Jesus expelled demons, but yet when it comes to demonic possession today, all of a sudden it's all mental illness. It's only mental illness. There's no external thing going on there. And that's very problematic.
As if those two things could be separate. As if those two things can be easily separated, which of course is not true.
Right.
I mean, if somebody's undergoing a demonic possession or obsession, vexation even, then it's very likely that they'll have at least a stress response to that, which is a mental response.
That's the problem.
And so,
correct.
I mean, Father Gabriel Amorth, the late exorcist for the Diocese of Rome, said exactly that. He said, of course we have to consider mental illness, but how do we know where mental illness stops and demonic vexation
they
begins?
go hand in hand.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
I've never known
his
one to
advice
not
was, we're on the
coexist
side of-
with the other. In fact, I would actually go as far as to
Right.
say that even people that are severely mentally ill are, if you dig deep enough into their spirituality, you're going to find demonic activity. Not that we all don't have that. It's just in many cases there's enough grace present there that it doesn't progress into something more severe, and thus they wouldn't go and seek an exorcist for it.
And that's and just to kind of preempt the people that would jump on top of what you've just said, that is not to suggest that people who have mental illnesses are evil or pernicious.
No, it's just about
No,
mental
definitely
weakness.
not.
Yeah, it's about mental and emotional weakness.
Well, it's just to say that they've been attacked.
Being
But when
compromised.
people, when people are diagnosed with a serious illness, cancer or heart disease or what have you, there is often accompanying that at least distress and very often depression.
Mm-hmm.
And some form of mental anguish, and so if that's the case with a cancer, why would that not be the case with a demonic problem?
Exactly.
Maybe even more the case.
Exactly.
And so but again, for me, that's actually a rational argument. Having attacked the rationalists, I'm going to apply their own logic to say, well, if people undergo suffering, they're going to have a mental health problem. I mean, goodness me, people are diagnosed with PTSD because someone used the wrong pronoun for them these days.
Yeah, that's not really PTSD, in my opinion.
I know,
but
hey.
No, but it's true. I mean, there are people that have become so vulnerable, or at least allowed themselves to become so vulnerable, that those kinds of emotional deficits do, in fact, create vulnerabilities that can definitely attract the attention of demonic forces. We are talking with Sister Mary Joan, and our guest tonight is Father Chris Yates, exorcist and priest from Australia, and we're discussing his work as well as the challenges of being an independent Catholic. When we come back here on the second half of the show, we're going to start talking about his work in exorcism ministry, find out what experiences he's had. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone, to Vestiges After Dark. My guest is Father Chris Yates, exorcist and priest from Australia and Independent Catholicism. That's the subject tonight, and we've got another hour to go. We'll be talking about his experiences here in a moment. And if you have an experience or a question or comment or want to join the conversation tonight, give us a call at 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. We might take you on the air and hear what you have to say. Don't go away. We'll be starting up again in just a moment. Well, before the break, we were getting ready to talk about, the conversation kind of shifted into exorcism again. So I guess at this point, Father Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about what exorcism ministry in the world that you come from out there, how is it? I mean, what are you experiencing and what are the challenges? Briefly, tell us a little bit about what you do in your outreach.
Yeah, sure. Well, to be very practical about it, there's a high demand here for, well, the way it normally starts is people will contact me or the church, and this happened when I was an Anglican as much as it happens now, and say, there's a problem at my house. Because I think that it's somehow more socially acceptable to say, I need my house blessing, or there's things that occur on the premises, and I think there's a psychological reason for that, because it's easier for somebody to say, oh, there's something happening in this place, rather than there's something happening with me. Mm-hmm. Because there's a great fear, I think, of people approaching a priest and saying, I think I might be undergoing some kind of demonic attack, because they may well have tried that before elsewhere. And been either laughed at or at worst or at best, not cared for. Anyway, so it normally manifests itself by people saying, there's a problem at my house, or there's a problem with one of my children, or what have you. It's normally something that's at least one step removed from the person I'm speaking to. And so now when they speak to me, they speak to somebody who takes them seriously. I've always believed in, if somebody's approaching you to tell you something about their lives, then you have to take them seriously, no matter what it is or who they are.
Right. So it's serious to them, no matter
Sister
what.
Mary Joan. Well, that's right. Sister Mary Joan could identify that. Actually, it wasn't the church that taught me that; it was the police.
Yes, sir.
Because actually,
all day, every day.
No matter where somebody's coming from,
we're used to dealing with people on their worst days. And so you get that empathy for someone, and you build a rapport with them, and you sometimes, you realize just how good you have it. But, you don't become a cop to handcuff people and throw them in jail. You're there to help people, and that's the number one priority. And,
I find no matter whether somebody's, whether somebody's violent, upset, whatever it may be, what ultimately calms somebody in the end is you giving them your full attention.
I couldn't tell you how many
because
times
once you've
I would
given someone-
fight with somebody, and then after it's over, the fight's over, they're handcuffed, we're on the way to jail. Next thing you know, we're like hugging it up in the intake because I would listen to them on the way. You know, they just wanted someone to listen to them, and they haven't had that in their lives. And sometimes that you've got to wear several different hats when you're in law enforcement, and it suits this ministry real well as well because you already have that experience.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, people say, oh, what, you know, why can't police de-escalate? It's very difficult to go from
sometimes you can't.
You know, somebody's trying to knock your head off to somebody bursting into tears. But as you said, that's often the case. In any case, I mean, I don't want to get too far off the question I've been asked, but you know, suffice it to say, when people speak to me, I take them seriously, and I've learned from experience that you know, that's the way to go. It's godly, but it's also the best tactic in terms of where to go from there. So, I mean, I'll mention a specific, because I sound a bit vague. So I'll mention a specific exorcism I was involved in. I won't name any names, obviously. But I was approached by a couple who were bringing their son for baptism, and so that was great, you know. And we went through the sort of, because it was an infant, there wasn't a lot of classes, but we went through a little bit of that, and they did the baptism. And the family were a lovely family. They kept in touch with me, but I could tell there was something that they were dying to ask me. And eventually it came. I was asked to come and do a house blessing. And so I think it was around the Feast of the Epiphany, which is where we traditionally do house blessings anyway. I mean, again, the background to all of this is the demand for an increased demand for exorcism for all of this stuff is because the church has left the building. You know, because people aren't connected to the church, because those traditional things like blessing chalk for Epiphany and blessing houses, all things that continue, of course, in the Orthodox world, because those things have fallen away. Now, this family, the woman in this family was of Croatian origin, and so although she was a Roman Catholic, she was from that Eastern mindset. And so, anyway, I went to do the house blessing, and I just got a sense that I've always been sensitive to darkness, I think, and I'm happy to talk about that at other times. Experiences from my childhood and from my family as well. But I sensed there was something heavy in the place, even though they were lovely people, like they were really nice, genuinely nice people. You know, there was no sense that they were involved in anything dark, but there was a heaviness that shouldn't have been there. Now, in Australia, I often put this down to, well, where, you know, it's only been Christianized for 200 years. Who knows what went on before that? And I'm not saying anything. Yeah, I'm not saying that pre-Christian worship was all demonic. I'm certainly not saying that. But we don't know whether houses have been developed on graveyards that pre-existed. We don't know anything really about pre-colonial Australia, or we know very little. And so, you know, I kind of work on the assumption that, well, there might be some problem there. Maybe it's been built on a graveyard. Maybe there's some unfinished business, something tragic that's happened here. But as I was blessing the place, I got the feeling that there was something I wasn't being told. Because people have to, and it wasn't because this woman was trying to deceive me. It's because she was trying to figure out if she could trust me. And I emphasize that to any priest or anybody involved in this kind of ministry, is that, you know, you have to establish that trust before the fullness of what people are experiencing will come out. And because why would they tell you if they think you're going to laugh at them, or you think you're going to deride them, or, you know, it's a very intimate revelation, and you don't reveal intimate things to people until you know them. And so anyway, it turned out that back a long time ago, I think it was in Croatia, I asked if there'd ever been any interference with black magic or with this sorts of things, and it turned out that her parents had been undergoing some kind of attack, and I suspect they did turn to the church, but the church probably did what you described at the beginning of the show, and so they turned to somebody who was involved in black magic, and there'd sure enough been some form of ritual. And I said, and were you there? And she said, well, we were sent to our rooms and had to stay there, her and her sister, that is. I said, and is there anything in this house apart from you that was there when that was performed? And she said, yes. And it was actually an icon. Well, it was Da Vinci's Last Supper, an icon of that on the wall. Right. I said, this was present in the house when that was done. And she said, yes. I said, okay. So all of a sudden, I'm now moving from a sort of baptism, house blessing, to the revelation of something dark's gone on and that they're experiencing darkness. And this has been experienced both by her and her very rational husband, who was recently retired from the army, and he too had experienced these sorts of things. So, and these were very, very, sober people, if you know what I mean. I didn't get any impression that they were skittish.
Right.
Very authentic. And so I thought, okay, well, I said, now I know this, then we'll do the house blessing. I said, but then I'll come back and I'll celebrate a mass in the house, and I'll say some more, direct. I'll send some more direct messages to whatever might be here. Right. And so that's what we did. We proceeded with that with mass in the house. Of course, I heard their confessions. Mass in the house, and then an exorcism of a place. And that was that for the time. I said, look, it isn't magic. These are prayers. It must be accompanied by a commitment to Christ. It's not me that's keeping this demonic spirit out. It's Jesus. And so anyway, sure enough, they and this is when people say, why does God allow this sort of thing to take place? Well, the fruits of that engagement they were at mass every week. They came to mass every week from then on. And then eventually I was, she spoke after mass and said that her sister was also having some problems in this regard, which is obviously not a surprise. And her sister was living with the parents. And so I went, and they'd had their house blessed by a Croatian priest, actually. And so I thought, well, I'll see what I can, I'll just spend some time with her. And she said, well, actually, I'm having trouble at my place of work. And she worked at this big warehouse on an industrial estate that sold flooring. And it was on 2 levels, and the top level was accessed by a sort of steel stairway. And I said, well, has anything happened in this building? And they said, well, yeah, the owner had committed suicide in that place. So all of a sudden, things are stacking up. We've got, a woman who was present at some kind of black mass as a child, where there's been some attachment formed there. And now we've got this, a very traumatic event that's happened in this place. And so I said, well, I'll come to the place of business and I'll bless it. So I went at the end of the business day, and there was just me, the owner of the business, and this woman that worked there, and we locked all the doors, and I started blessing the place. And it was a huge expanse of a place, and so I started in the main warehouse. There was living quarters where this man had killed himself, and then I came to go up the stairs up to the first level back into the main warehouse. And an enormous stone flower pot. It was from the ground to chest height. Had been pushed in front of that stairway.
What?
Now there was nobody else. There was nobody else in the building. It was locked. Again, I was a copper for 10 years. I know how to secure a building.
Right.
Right.
And so, and actually, I could barely move the thing out of the way. I had to use all my bodily force to move this plant. In other words, me and these 2 women that were in this place, there's no way either of them could have moved it, and they were with me the whole time. And I thought, well, and this is where being a real man comes in. I said, well, bugger you, I'm going up those stairs. So I managed to move this flower pot out of the way. and plant pot. I can't even tell you how heavy it was. And then I went up the steps and proceeded with the rest of the blessing and exorcism. And at that point, I did shift to an imperative form of exorcism as well, because I thought, well, whatever you are that's here, you're manifesting in a very powerful way to be able to move such a thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And so yeah, and thereafter, that relationship with that family continued. I mean, I ended up being present at the death of her mother, because they tried to call their local priest, and he was obviously occupied, and so I went over and with her administered extreme unction, and that relationship has continued. And so, I mean, I say this by way of explaining to people that these were sincere, sober, godly people undergoing this kind of attack.
Right.
And so, suffering from, who if you were the devil, who would you pick on? You'd hate the faithful more, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to go after the people that are strong in their faith.
Yeah, well, there's a great quote from, and I know you American listeners will may be surprised to hear this, but my great hero in the faith is the late Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who I know is like a household name in America. He's less known elsewhere, but he gave a great quote. I'll share it with you if you don't mind, on this exact point. He said, very few people believe in the devil these days, which suits the devil very well. He's always helping to circulate the news of his own death. The essence of God is existence. He defines himself as I am who am. The essence of the devil is the lie. He defines himself, I am who am not. Satan has very little trouble with those who do not believe in him. They are already on his side.
Right.
And I think that comes to the heart of this, is that if people are reluctant to speak to you, to me, to exorcists, to say I'm struggling with this, it may be because they think, well, I'm obviously damned, or I'm condemned, or I'm a terrible person, and that's why.
We've had a lot of people say that.
Yeah, I've had situations where I was able to resolve their particular issue just merely by hearing their confession. The sacrament.
Right, I remember one in particular.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's been, that was the one I think I know the one you're talking about, but there's been several in the course of my work, and I can say that the sacrament of reconciliation has been far more effective than any other strategy, but it's usually sometimes very difficult to get a person agreeable to not only receiving it, but their part that they play in it, because as you know, reconciliation can only be conferred when there is true contrition, and there has to be a willingness to want to be forgiven, and a lot of people don't feel they're worthy of forgiveness, and that creates a stumbling block towards their solution. But it's just one of the many challenges. Calling in from the 765 area code in Indiana. Hello, you are on the air.
Hello, everyone. My question is in regards to how on many Ghost Adventures episodes, Bishop Bryan and Mary Joan speak about the vomiting as a way of physical proof. They're trying to expel an evil spirit or attachment, oppression. So my question was to ask, is there any other type of physical expressions, like maybe a bloody nose or loss of their bowels, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, demonic activity can manifest in a multitude of ways. There's really no one definitive thing. I mean, there's obviously the more common ones that we look for, and that is bad smells, typically excrement, sulfur, and rotting flesh. Those are kind of the primary ones that people report. But sometimes the demonic can be very subtle, and it's not always as dramatic as what we would expect, or sometimes as an exorcist we'd want to see, particularly from the investigation side of it, because it's a lot easier when there's a lot of anomalies to record and identify and then say, well, this is what's going on here. It's far more difficult when it's subtle. And a lot of times it gets very subtle. And it really kind of breaks down to a point where everybody's questioning whether or not there's something really going on there, including the people that even called us out. We've had situations where they've called us, we've gone out, we can't find anything, and then they start to question whether or not it was anything at all, or if they just let their imaginations run wild. So, the fact of the matter is, there is literally nothing that the demonic cannot use as a means of manifestation. And it can sometimes be even in pleasant ways. It doesn't always have to be in this negative experience or reaction. But yeah, I mean, any kind of traditional haunting activity, anything that would be traditionally associated with a common haunting, can be actually a demonic event. It's not always the case. In fact, it usually is not the case, but sometimes demonic infestations can just appear to be generic hauntings. You have to always look a little further and see the long-term effects that particular activity is having on the people involved. And if they're getting worse, and if they're starting to show physiological, emotional, psychological, and, of course, spiritual signs that are of a nature that would degrade their overall health holistically, then that's something that we need to look at. And even then, that doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about something satanic. We could be talking about something just negatively oriented towards a more elemental condition, or some other kind of paranormal activity that's not healthy for human beings to be around. So there's always that factor. But usually in people that are suffering or contending with something that is genuinely demonic, it will start to affect them in ways initially where it is depression and anxiety. And as Father Chris talked about earlier, that line between mental health and spiritual health is rather thin. And very often you will never have one that does not occur without the other. So particularly when you're talking about genuine demonic activity, it will almost always have a psychological consequence to it, so that makes it complicated. But it starts off usually with depression and anxiety, panic, night terrors, that type of thing. But then it progresses, and then it starts to get into these indistinctive physiological stuff that they go to the doctor, but the doctor can never find anything wrong. They get diagnosed with all these conditions, and then they get treated for those conditions, but they don't get better, they get worse. And then over time, you start to look at where you see that when they pray, there's a reaction. Sometimes it makes them better, but medicine makes them worse, and it should be the other way around if it's a physiological condition, or not necessarily the other way around, but it's like, the medicine should help. Whether there's prayer or not, if the condition is genuinely what the problem is. But if it's a spiritual condition, medicine typically won't help, particularly when you see it with depression and anxiety, where you have really good medications for this. Particularly anxiety, taking a tranquilizer, for example, should reduce anxiety almost instantaneously, and yet you'll see a person who's having a severe demonic attachment, or the effects from a severe demonic attachment, they'll take a tranquilizer and it has no effect on them whatsoever.
There's nothing.
Yeah. So this is stuff that we look for. But, to say that there's one in particular thing, it could, yes, nosebleeds, anything physiological can be a sign or not a sign. You always have to look at the entire dynamic. What is going on there? What's going on there spiritually in their life? What leads them to think that there could be something that is paranormal at work? And usually that comes from having gone to doctors or gone to psychologists and having done things the conventional way, but not finding a solution. And then coming to this realization that maybe there's something else going on here. And that's when you start to look at the environment and how, if there are environmental disturbances that are coinciding with everything else that's going on. So are things moving around by themselves? Are you seeing things? Are you feeling that you're, being watched when you're alone? Do you feel like you're never alone? You have to start paying attention to these subtle things that some people would just dismiss real quickly and say, well, that's just my imagination running away with me. And maybe it is. But if there's all these other things going on and you're having those kinds of experiences, then we take that more seriously. But that's where the paranormal investigation aspect comes into it, where that's something that the conventional church largely ignores. I can tell you right now, I don't know any Roman Catholic investigation team that uses SLS or EVP as a means of trying to identify or diagnose a spiritual problem. That's something that's kind of unique to, us in that sense. I mean, I guess there's others probably doing it now, but just generally it was never done prior to the advent of paranormal television reality shows. But we find it very useful, very helpful, because what it does is if we can validate something that the client's experiencing and only that client's experiencing it or only that family's experiencing it, and we come in and we can actually record a voice that they're hearing on an EVP or capture something on video that shows something walking around or latched on to an individual, that's helpful, not just because it gives us an idea that they're not malingering and they're not mentally ill, it's something spiritual going on, but at the same time it gives the client validation, which is usually can be sort of utilized by both the client and us to encourage them to get the situation resolved, because as soon as that barrier to belief is conquered, that's when the real healing begins. A lot of the reactions that I find with the demonic are caused by apathy. Father Chris, what else could you add to that list? I mean, if you're talking about other kinds of things that people could experience that might be, demonically related, but not necessarily well known, or how would you answer that? Have you seen things that are sort of irregular?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to go back to the initial comment on vomiting. That I think my approach or my understanding is that the vomiting aspect is often something that's a product of exorcism. So
yeah,
the idea is that if somebody has been cursed by an object, by an amulet, by something that's been ingested, that's been a source of this possession. It could have been that somebody intended to inflict this on somebody, or it could have been accidental, or what have you. That sometimes within an exorcism, although this has never happened in my ministry, objects are excreted from the body as the physical removal of that object is connected to the spiritual removal of the demon.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that too, nails and such. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And so he gave examples of people bringing up things that actually, if they'd physically come up from their gut, would have probably killed them. I mean, a 6-inch nail coming up your esophagus would probably do you a lot of damage. And his explanation is that these are actually spiritual manifestations that then become present in the mouth and are expelled. And so, who knows how these things are. But I just wanted to pick up on that notion of vomiting, that often, rather than being a sort of symptom of possession, which I'm sure it can be, because as you've said, any number of things taken as a whole can indicate, demonic activity. But like I say, my understanding is that the more acute experiences of vomiting is actually about conquering and overcoming these things. But
it seems to be a physiological reaction to the removal. It's almost like it's a symbolic action that the body undergoes to purge the malevolence within. That's how I've seen it, because I've there's never been an exorcism on a person that I have ever performed where there was not some kind of vomiting or spitting up at the very least. There always is something that comes up. Usually it's like a mucus.
Everyone I've done with you, that's been the case.
Yeah.
It's either dry heaving, thick spittle, or just, very little spittle, but definitely the dry heaving.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well, it's certainly connected to the breath, isn't it? I mean, if you look at, again, this is totally Catholic theology, that the spirit is on the breath. The word for the spirit in the New Testament is pneuma in Greek, breath.
Yeah.
In the Old Testament, in Hebrew, ruach, wind. When a priest blesses water, he breathes on the water. When we baptize people, we blow into their nostrils and into their ears. The ephata be open. There's the spirits on the breath.
Yeah.
And therefore, if there's an evil spirit, it exits on the breath as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly
and that's
right.
why often even if it's just a massive outpouring of emotion of crying, well, there's no crying without massive releases of breath. And so, absolutely, it's on the breath. But going back to signs of possession, I think that one of the most common forms of a sign of possession is, and I know, look, this is dramatized in Hollywood, and so when I say this, you'll picture something more dramatic, but aversion to holy images or holy objects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, yes, it can be something as profound as drawing the sign of the cross on someone's skin and something bulging out, but that's not been my experience. My experience is that people who are undergoing this sort of thing can just feel ill around, those sorts of icons or crosses, or there's something that keeps them out of churches, for example. The primary place an exorcism of a person should take place is in a church or on the Holy Land.
Yeah.
But often people can't do that. Like, they physically can't enter the premises without feeling very ill. Well,
we've had that.
We've definitely had that.
Like we're carrying someone like a sack of potatoes into the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Calling in from the 360 area code in Washington State. Hello, you are on the air.
Absolutely, it's on the breath.
Hello, Washington, you're on.
Of possession. I think that one.
Turn down your volume.
You're listening to us on the. But are you on the phone?
Yeah. Turn down your volume.
This is dramatized in Hollywood. So when I say
360 going once, going twice.
Yeah, there's a delay. Caller, turn down your radio or your laptop.
Now, yes, it can.
Okay, going on to the next call. Area code 702 in my favorite, Las Vegas, Nevada. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. So going back to the sorry, my bird's in the background.
That's
loud,
okay.
So
Hi,
I'm going
bird.
to try to get
You
somewhere where it's a little quieter.
You can't set a bird up.
I'm trying. By the way, I'm the person that I had my daughter calling for me because I didn't have a voice a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yes, we remember you.
You got your voice back.
Yes,
Yay.
I have a voice now. Yay!
Yay!
You were trying so hard, and then we all got laryngitis out here
know.
too. So you're in good company.
I noticed that wasn't my fault, by the way.
I think I caught it over the
for
phone
you.
line.
Electronic infection.
Yeah,
It's supposed to be share a cold, right?
that's right.
Right.
Going back to what you guys were discussing about having a demonic entity or some type of an entity causing illness.
Yeah.
Can whatever it is, whether you want to call it demonic or I don't even know what to call it, does it only affect one person, or are there incidences where it can affect multiple household members?
It will usually target onto one.
One earlier. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I would say if you heard the incident I described earlier, it was in fact a whole family.
Okay.
That was impacted by this, but hey, it can be either.
Yeah.
It can also be that there's one person in a household. Look at Padre Pio, for example. Padre Pio lived in a community, but only he underwent this kind of attack. So the answer is it can be either.
Yeah, I would say that's very accurate. I mean, it usually latches on and focuses on one individual. And if the family is very close, then it's very possible that everybody living in the household is going to be affected to varying degrees. If they're not as close, I find, then I find that that's usually more of an isolated situation where it's affecting just the one person that is the true target. But yes, it can absolutely, as Father Chris said, be either or. You don't really know, but I will say this, that, if you have a bunch of people living together in a small house or a small enough house, and one of those individuals acquires a demonic attachment, it's going to start to bleed into the environment, and it's going to start to affect other people that are in close proximity to it. So some of it has to do with how long it's been going on, and then again, how close the family is. The closer the family, the more likely it is that more members of the family are going to be affected in some way.
Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah.
All righty.
Yeah, good question, though. Thank you.
It answers a lot of questions. And so even just moving doesn't take care of it, obviously, because we're still experiencing a lot of issues, only it's escalated.
Right.
It's really escalated.
Well, that's a good indication that the issue is with a person rather than with the place.
Yeah. The person's haunted, not the location.
Yeah.
But my only issue is it's kind of like it's spread to my kids, and that's where I have a problem with it. It started off with me, and I've been my daughter mentioned that I've been able to see things, feel things, unfortunately hear things, experience things ever since I was a child. It was always dismissed because, my parents were old-fashioned. You don't talk about that in the house.
Yeah.
But I feel like I know it's probably coming from me, but I feel like I don't want to say I'm doing something to escalate it, but I feel like it is escalating, but it's over the years have spread out to my younger children.
And that,
to some serious illnesses
that can happen.
Cannot be explained.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. And like I said, a closer the family is, the more likely that the attachment can start to branch out and affect all members that are present there. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Just want a reassurance. So sometimes you think, okay, you're going off your rocker,
No.
You're not crazy.
No,
okay,
you're not.
Thank you.
But certainly it definitely would be advantageous to start to look into solutions for this, so that it doesn't progress. Because see, that's the problem, is that now that you have seen, or at least been able to recognize that it started small and then it is now affecting more people, that typically means it's only going to worsen. And usually these kinds of attachments don't get better. They progressively get worse and methodically over time. So the sooner you rectify it, typically the better the prognosis. It's just like any kind of terminal illness, for example. Cancer, anyone will tell you, getting cancer early is your best chance of surviving cancer. If you wait till you're stage 4, probably not so much. And that's the problem, is people just live with it. They deal with it for so long. They even get comfortable with their attachments after a while that they become apathetic to them. And once it reaches the point that it's so bad, then they get help, and then there's very little that we can do. I
think the biggest problem is there's no help, because my husband and I tried to get help when it all first started many years. This has been going on for a long time. In fact, we've changed houses, and it's still going on, and it's gotten worse. But we tried to get help before, and we were turned away. So after you get shut down a couple of times, there's no help.
Well, do me a favor.
So after.
Do me a favor. Go to our website. Go to esotericcatholic.org and click on the section where it says request an investigation, and fill out that intake form. Okay?
Okay.
Sister
Sure.
Mary Joan will then.
I was just
Go ahead, Father.
about to say that. I was just about to say. I mean, and really, Bishop Bryan, you said it. I mean, the first thing I was going to say is you cannot ignore it.
No.
So you have to do something
Right.
about this. And I appreciate the challenges of getting something done about it. That's kind of what Bishop Bryan and I were speaking of this whole show. But the second question is again something that Bishop Bryan you alluded to is, do you want it to go? In other
Right.
words, is it your? Are you attached to it yourself? If you know what I mean. You have to
I'm
leave.
tired. I'm tired of it because I'm tired.
Yeah, it
of
sounds like she's ready to kick it in the butt and get it going.
It does.
We've been actually trying ourselves, but it's like, sometimes you think
Yeah.
you're really like you've gone
You
off
just
the
need
deep
some
end.
backup.
It's very hard for a lay person to remove these kinds of things themselves. It really is. I mean, even if they have a little bit of knowledge about how to do it, it's more difficult. It really is than people realize. And there's a certain art to it. I think there's a skill to it, that a talent to it that some people.
There's a gift as well.
It's a gift. It is. It's a gift. So what I'd like you to do is go to the Esoteric Catholic website. Go ahead and fill out the intake form. What's your first name, if you don't mind my asking?
Anne.
Ann. Okay. So when we
Okay,
see
I'll be looking for your intake, Ann.
when we see an Ann
Okay.
come in, I'm going to send that to Sister Mary Jones so that she's the one to call you. And
Okay.
when travel returns to normal, or I should say, when travel is normal, I'm usually in Las Vegas at least 3 or 4 times a year. And
Yeah, we've
so
got 1 or 2 cases out there right now.
we
so.
we always have a case out there. So typically, we'll pick up on a trip a case at the end of a trip. Particularly if it's a business trip. I on a vacation I don't typically take cases, but if I'm going out there for business, I'll sometimes extend my stay there and take a case. So
Okay.
we'll at our next possible trip out there where we can work a case, we'll take your case.
Okay. No pressure, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I want
Even
to be
if we
able to
could
help,
just discuss
and
a little bit of it, you
yeah.
know.
Trust me, I wish we could go tomorrow, but that's just not in the cards right now. But
Yeah.
we could definitely get you in the queue and add you to one of the add you to the rotation that's going on out there. I believe we have 1 or 2 right now cases in Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we can
Wonderful.
maybe like do a combination thing and maybe hit a couple of them in
Mhm.
one trip, and that way it will be less cost for the church, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
But yeah,
All right.
please do that and do it soon so that we can definitely watch for it and put you at the put you in the queue for that, because we already had a case out there that we were going to take as soon as travel opens up to our liking, and we'll just add you on to that same one.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. Thank
God
you for
bless.
calling in, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean that's
Bye.
a really good. I
Bye-bye.
mean, what she brings up there is a really good example of some of the challenges here. Also in the work is that people can't find the help that they need. My lawyer asked me once. He was really into Ghost Adventures. Didn't know that I didn't put 2 and 2 together until after the fact that I was the exorcist on the show, and then he got really excited about this. And his son, I guess, does the closed captioning for Ghost Adventures, so he's done them all, and he knew who I was. But he asked me. He says, "Why don't you start an organization that links all of these independent investigators and spiritual resolvers," I don't know what you call them, people that solve spiritual problems, I guess, links them into like a database so that when cases come in places that you can't get to, you can refer them out to that. And I said to him, I said, that's what the Order of Exorcists was designed to be. But the problem is, there is the resources to manage something like that correctly are so great, and when you don't have a standardized protocol, And the Order of Exorcists does, and even then there are still problems and abuses and people claiming the name, or being kicked out but not wanting to accept the fact that they were kicked out, and they still will report to the public that they're affiliated when they're not, and needing like $20,000 to go in there and resolve that legally. It's the kinds of things that we see in this ministry, from just the mundane standpoint, is such a headache that I couldn't even imagine what it would be to vet all these people and make sure that all these people are doing things correctly and that they are safe to refer one of our clients to. So I would love for something like that to exist.
Yeah, it would fill me with terror. That kind of task. I mean.
Yeah, I'm sitting here sweating thinking about it. I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine?
Can you imagine
all the work you'd have to do? Good Lord.
I mean, it's why Father Gabriel Amorth, I know I've mentioned him a few times in the show, but he really is worth people spending some time with, because he was really engaged in this battle, and it was him that was pushing the Roman Church to say, look, we're supposed to have, this is exactly what is supposed to exist, you see. Each diocese is supposed to have a diocesan exorcist.
Yeah.
Not all do. In fact, most don't.
Most don't these days, yeah.
I think we have to recognize that within the Roman Catholic Church, there are these arguments and fissures and discussions. I remember once I was speaking to Sister Mary Joan just before the show, and I said, a good friend of mine is a Roman Catholic bishop. At the time, I was an Anglican. I said, I'm sick of all of this division. I just want to become a Catholic. And he said, well, don't be confused don't be fooled by the veneer of unity of the Roman Catholic Church. And I kind of know what he means, and he's obviously somebody who's dedicated his entire life to it, and so I think that the reason that it's such a nightmare for us to consider the sort of ministry your lawyer was suggesting is because it shouldn't be necessary. That is in fact the role of the church.
Yes.
And and it explains why we're doing what we're doing. And we've spoken a lot about being Catholic, but actually, I think what the church has lost is the sense of it being apostolic.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
There's an overemphasis on Catholic and less on apostolic, because it's an apostolic ministry to be a priest, for example. That there is a power, the power of the Holy Spirit that's imparted on a man when he's ordained, and it's that gift and power that's at work in exorcism, which is why there is a difference between a layman trying to exorcise or a layman trying to exorcise themselves and actually an apostolically ordained person being sent out. And of course, it's gospel. I mean, the first miracle in the Gospel of Mark is performed by Jesus himself, is an exorcism.
Yeah.
And we are commanded by Jesus to exorcise demons. And yet it seems to have evaporated as part of the mission of the church in the mainstream.
It has. You're absolutely right. And I mean, I think that is really fundamentally what's wrong on multiple levels, not just with this particular issue, but with all spiritual issues, and why we're seeing a church that is degrading and falling apart. It's sad to see, but it has to do with what you just said about losing focus and emphasis on that apostolic aspect, and we can't allow that to happen. I mean, none of us can. No Christian can afford to let that happen. But it is, and it does. But we're at the end of the show, Father Chris. Is there a way that our audience can, get in touch with you if they have questions or need your services, particularly out there in Australia?
Oh, sure. That's a really good point, and one I should have thought about before I came on the show. I've got a website. Because we've got a website which has a facility for questions to be asked of us. So so here we are. It is OLW, and that's the initials of Our Lady of Walsingham, olwcatholic.wordpress.com.
.wordpress.com. Okay.
So, olwcatholic.wordpress.com. We're in the process of ICAB is fairly recently exported to Australia, so we're in the process of setting up all of the mundane stuff, the infrastructure and what have you. But yeah, if you go to olw.wordpress.com, then you can, if you put a message on there, it will come straight through to my email. So I'll be able to reply or be in contact with you.
Fantastic.
Sounds great.
Well,
Thank you,
Father Chris,
Father.
thank you so much for being with us this evening and morning for you. And in the future, I'd like to invite you back to be a regular guest on our open line shows when we have callers coming in, because you can help us to keep the conversation
Definitely.
going in such wonderful ways. There's no shortage of topics that we could tackle while we wait for callers, and sometimes we have like hot nights like tonight. There was a lot of people that were in the queue at one point. They gave up, I guess. I don't know what happened. They hang up. They shouldn't, but they do. But sometimes you have hot nights and sometimes you have cold nights, and so on those cold nights it would be great to just sit and talk and chat about a subject. So we would love to have you on regularly if that would be okay.
It's been wonderful being on the show, and you're a real blessing to the church. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Father
you,
Chris.
Father.
God bless. Sister
Thank
Mary
you.
Joan, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
And next week, we'll be back. We're going to have a very, very interesting show for you. I'm really excited about it. I'm not even going to mention what it's about, but it's going to blow your mind. Okay, so don't miss it next week, Tuesday, at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you then. God bless. Take care, everyone.
90 seconds. Seconds. Seconds.